Well, good evening, Mayor Wright and City Council. It's my pleasure to present our proposal this evening. Looking at the theme of what we're putting together, it really is mostly about code enforcement. And by means of history, when I started here a little less than 4 years ago, we had one deputy community development director who served as the code enforcement manager and 2 code enforcement officers. That was the extent of the code enforcement division. We've had the opportunity under Measure C to slowly grow that division, and I think our successes in the community are very apparent. It's the one function where I get a lot of gets a lot of attention. They do a lot of amazing work in our community. But our growth to this point has been a bit scattershot. We've experimented with new things. We've tried different things. We've brought on contract staff and part-time staff, and I think by now we've really figured out what works. If you'll recall, the abatement team was an experiment. It was an idea we had, and we said, let's try this out and see what it would mean to have a couple of guys in trucks and trailers running around picking up the garbage that people dump and other cleanups here and there. I think that's been an amazing success. So this evening in this proposal, what we're trying to do is really create a sustainable model for our code enforcement division for the future. I think the time for experimentation has come and gone. We've figured out what works. And we're really hoping to lock that in and make that the model of our code enforcement division. So with that, I'll just go through the numbers here. The first one is we'd like to hire another general laborer. That is the title of the position for our abatement team. We currently have 2 laborers serving in that position. They each drive a truck and trailer, and we're looking to bring in a 3rd. I should note that we already have the truck purchased because if you'll recall, the council did give us permission to hire 2 part-time laborers. We haven't been successful in finding that crew, but we do have the equipment in place. So we would request that we hire 1 full-time laborer to replace those 2 part-time. We would trade one for the other. The second is we'd like to add 1 full-time code enforcement officer. Right now we have 3 full-time code enforcement officers in addition to Kurt Michael, our code enforcement manager. They accomplish a lot, and they are really the boots on the ground. They are the point of contact. They handle very simple cases all the way up through very complex cases. This would improve our ability to do that. It's worth noting that we are looking at transitioning our community development block grant and housing inspection program into our building inspection services division, which would free up code enforcement to do general code enforcement. Right now, one of our 3 officers is restricted to certain areas and certain types of enforcement as a function of their funding. We'd be looking to shift that over to building. It's the more appropriate location for that function, and that's typically what other cities do. What that means is, in the end, we would have 4 officers who are available to serve the entire city without restriction and address all manners of violations. That position would replace the 2 budgeted contract code enforcement officers that we currently have on the books. Third, we'd like to hire a development services tech. Right now we have a part-time employee who brings with her decades of service to the city of Antioch, knows this city inside and out. I'll say it, Denise Skaggs. Hi, Denise. I'm sure she's watching. She knows this community better than anybody I've run across, and she brings an institutional knowledge. So even at part-time, she's able to accomplish a lot. Denise is officially retiring at the end of this year, she's told us, and we're looking to replace her part-time position with a full-time tech. That tech would do all the job duties that Denise currently does, and would also be able to supplement the additional code enforcement officer and all the paperwork that comes along with that, and also potentially be able to assist in some other community development, accounting, budgeting functions. So as you can imagine, code enforcement, they generate a lot of paperwork, a lot of, as the complaints come in, they're processed and they're filed. Maintaining all of that is a busy job. We have 1 person doing that right now who also serves the counter. This person would be behind the scenes. In addition, we make a lot of trips to the county building to record liens and process release of liens. This person would do that as well. So that's that position we're looking for. Finally, number 4, I'd like to reclassify our 2 general laborers who serve as our abatement team as street maintenance workers. When we started this program, the general laborer was a very generic position, and it seemed to fit the bill But as we've watched this abatement team grow and mature and see the level of independence, the exercise of judgment that's required of this job, I feel it's appropriate that they should no longer be kept at the bottom rung of this type of work in the city and be bumped up a step that's frankly comparable to what you'd see entry level for a lot of the public works crews. So I would like to reclassify those two positions because at the end of the day, what they're doing reflects greater this position and its expectation than it does the general laborer. So those are our 4 points here. I want to point out that we already have vehicles in place for all of these positions, and same with computers because we've been using contract staff. So there would be minimal startup expenses. Look forward to answering any questions you may have, and I'll conclude at that point. Thank you.
Quick question I have on item number 2.
Yes.
It says basically, if I'm reading this right, we're going to offset $250,000 that's budgeted, and it's going to cost us roughly $150,000. Is that correct? So that's a $100,000 savings.
It is, but I want to be, to full disclosure, $250,000 was for 2 contract code enforcement officers. We've had a heck of a time keeping 2. In this job market, it's very difficult. We have 1 right now who's been working out great, but we haven't had the same kind of success with others.
So, but from a budget standpoint, I understand you're saying labor-wise, it's an offset 1 for 1, but budget-wise, it's a savings of $100,000. Is that correct?
It's 2 to 1. We're losing 2
Right.
contract positions to gain 1 full-time.
Right, but you're saying that we've only been able to hire 1 of those.
Correct.
So from a labor standpoint.
That's correct. I'm sorry, yes.
Councilmember Thorpe.
Yeah, and I know this exercise was just kind of a preliminary thing. This is got some emails saying, "Oh, the budget." This is not a budget. This is not a proposed budget. These are some ideas our staff put out and said, let's take a look at this. So this is a wish list, as the city manager has kind of framed it. So for anyone to suggest that this is a budget or that we're looking at a budget is absolutely wrong. What I do want to get at for us, and I know we had a long conversation yesterday, and I just want to make sure that kind of the public understands. For me, your wish list, particularly from a code enforcement perspective, for me, it's unacceptable. And I see Marty Hernandez out there, and I still remember his tour that he gave me. He could probably give me the exact same tour, point out the exact same homes, point out the exact same intersections, corners, whatever, with the same garbage that we've been looking at for years. So from my vantage point, I think as you go and prepare your budget, you need to really rethink beefing up our code enforcement division. We've had 3 before Measure C, is what you told me in that email. We had 4 after Measure C, and part of the 4 were budgeted through CDBG funding. And so for anyone to suggest that we've used Measure C funding for code enforcement and to really get out there is insulting, because we have not. And to go from 3, 4 to 5 now code enforcement officers, in my opinion, is absolutely unacceptable. There's work to do out in this community. There are things we need to clean up. And I know we talked more extensively yesterday, and so I shared my thoughts. But I will just leave it at that I find this unacceptable.
Mayor Pro Tem Motz.
Forrest, how many code enforcement did we have prior to the downturn?
We had 10.
Oh, there we go.
We had 10.
And I will say prior to Measure C, we actually had no full-time code enforcement officers. We only had, I believe, some contractual. So Measure C actually allowed us to hire the full-time
The 1 full-time?
code enforcement officers. So
But prior to the downturn,
We had 10.
we had 10.
well, right, yes, prior to the downturn.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to agree with Councilman Thorpe. This is insufficient. I think probably one of the number 1 complaints from the citizens of the community is the blight and irresponsible landlords, rundown properties, things that are just really making it very difficult for people to feel good about their city and where they live, and also for us to be promoting jobs and development. I think it's probably one of our number 1 issues that I think we all know that blighted areas are conducive, in bringing in crime, which does not help our police department. So I think we need to relook at this. I mean, my recommendation would be for at least an additional 4 code enforcement officers to even get us close to where we were prior to the recession, and possibly additional general laborers. And I don't know, but it seems to me that they do a lot of the abatement of the community. So that would be my recommendation, that we relook at this when it comes to our code enforcement and how we are really addressing cleaning up the community.
Councilmember Overchuk.
Forrest, thanks for the report, but can you tell me how you came up with these numbers? I mean, what made you not ask for more as council is asking you? Why did you do this?
We're always sensitive to the competing demands of the city council. So I felt this is the minimum. The goal here was to stabilize, and you know, we just talked about unfunded liabilities. There's a lot of moving parts before this council right now, so I'm trying to be sensitive to that. I saw this as a basic program moving forward, how to be able to maintain the levels of service that we have in a long-term vision. I didn't come at this, necessarily with the direction to go aggressively grow the division, but I do hear that loud and clear. This is, package A. We could certainly talk and come back with alternatives that are more aggressive than this.
Okay, and then my other question is, on this $250,000 that was just discussed, is that a one-time fee for 18-19?
It was budgeted for a single fiscal year, the notion that we would be hiring 2 contract officers. We've only been able to keep 1.
So that offset would only be for 1 year. For the following years, then it would incur the full cost. And is CDBG going to cover any more of the funds? I'm sorry, I didn't let you answer the last question.
So 18-19, we budgeted $250,000 for 2 contract code enforcement officers. We're going to leave a lot of money on the table there because we weren't able to spend it because we couldn't get the officers. That will not be renewed for 19-20. And so we're going to start all over and just replace that with the cost of the code enforcement officer.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilson.
Yes, thank you for your report, Forrest. I'm not going to repeat some of the things that have already been said. And, I think we've asked from you and for all the other department heads, so be prepared for the same question. What is your wish list? If kind of money was no object, what was your wish list so we could have a better idea? So my question for you, and before I get to the question, let me back up a little bit. I think some of our department heads, because it seems like 2 of you got the message on your wish list and thought about money not being an object. I think we need to get out of this mindset of I think we've been on bare bones spending for so long that we're stuck in that mindset. And I think now we're finally at that pivotal point where we need to start thinking to the future. How do we get blight off our street? How do we make our second floor run efficiently and quickly? Because we do get emails about that. You do. How do you see your department 10 years down the road, and how and functioning at a place where now more revenue is going to start coming in, and we're going to start seeing more and more business coming in, and yes, there's going to be blight, and how do we keep ahead of it? So that would be my question to you. What is your vision? What is your vision of your department? I'm going to ask this of all the other departments. So
I want to say what you see before you. My vision. This is establishing the foundation to build a department. As I mentioned, in the past few years, we've been experimenting and trying new things and throwing this on and pulling this out. I see this model maintaining a full-time code enforcement staff. There's a lot of good reasons to keep full-time employment rather than try to use contract staff. I should say that the 3 code enforcement officers we have been here since I started, or very shortly thereafter. We have a very dedicated team. My vision is to grow this, but to have a model to grow that, because I need to point out that as you grow code enforcement, there's a ripple effect, because when somebody has...
That was what we were getting at. You just said as you grow, what's the ripple effect, and how do you face that?
When code enforcement identifies building code violations, that person comes in and they need service at the building department. And if we haven't grown the building department at all, there's going to be a long line at the building department.
But you didn't put that in your report.
I did not. And the same thing goes for planning. When they identify a planning violation, they come in and the planner has to drop the report they're working on to go talk to that person at the counter, and then that's probably some of the calls you're getting is, why is it taking so long for my item? So we're always balancing priorities, and that's That's not unique to Antioch. That's everywhere. But again, that's where we're at right now. I think we could keep all staffing consistent with this model. If the message here is to grow this, I would study this a little bit closer and see at what points would we trigger needs elsewhere.
So, yeah, definitely go back and look at that.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. So just a closing word. I really hear the council and I really appreciate your confidence in our department, and I know my staff appreciates it. They work really hard, and it's good to see that it's being recognized by the council. So I thank you for your time.
Chief.
So next we'll ask Chief Brooks to join us and discuss the request of the police department.
While Chief Brooks is on his way up, I just want to mention that